right. Hello, everybody. This is Brent Gleason, CEO and founder of Taking Point Leadership. Thanks for joining us on our YouTube session live today to learn a little bit about our planning and debriefing methodology, the same methodology as we use in the SEAL teams and in special operations and what we teach our clients here at Taking Point Leadership. Last time we covered this briefly, but we got such positive feedback and some questions about how to actually dive in tactically into this methodology, not just in planning, but also in proper debriefing, so that all of our organizations can stay in a constant state of improvement and lessons learned and applying those to the battlefield and how we adjust and shift fire. I think we're all in an element right now of having to shift fire on the battlefield, businesses large and small, or needing to rethink our 2020 initiatives, our strategies, strategic imperatives, and even think into 2021 and beyond. And what does business look like? How do we approach the marketplace? How do we approach our workforce internally and externally? How do we position our businesses now, not later, but right now, to come out of this stronger than ever before? We keep hearing that phrase, well, when this is all over, when this is all over. Well, it's not going to be a flip that's switched and we're just going to go back to business as usual. This will be a gradual progression, and we're going to see ripple effects of this on into next year, of course. But today is all about positivity, and we want to provide our very specific D4 planning methodology. So first and foremost, today we actually have our Taking Point Leadership planning and debriefing worksheets. It's only 4 total pages. So you'll see at the very top of the comment section, we've created a link there that will take you to our newsletter sign up. You may already be signed up, but you can just go through the process again. Don't worry, we're not going to spam you with a bunch of worthless nonsense. Then you'll get an email to the top of your inbox with a link to download the PDF version of this worksheet right here. I've got some notes on mine already. This is something you can use either to follow along. You can take notes today. Probably won't have time to go print it out. You feel free to do that if you have a moment, but also for you to use moving forward for any project, any plan, large and small. So follow along, take notes. The first 3 people to download this worksheet and go through the process are going to get a free signed copy of my best-selling book, Taking Point. So feel free. This worksheet is going to help you, not just for today's session, but any plans, any projects moving forward within your organization, within a team, a small business. So please feel free to take advantage of this offering. Today's going to be short. We're going to keep it to about 20 minutes. We're really going to dive into the tactics of the planning methodology, as well as our debriefing framework. So please stick around. I'll also be taking some tactical pauses to answer some questions. So I'll try to do a better job of that today than I did last time. So I've got some notes in here to take some pauses to answer any questions. So feel free to ask as many questions as you want about the methodology, share any information, or if you want to hear deeper about some more actual examples, I'll try to provide some examples as we go through this. So again, today is about pivoting on the battlefield. We're going to learn about the planning and debriefing methodology that we use in the SEAL teams and that we use in business. So one of my favorite quotes, many of you have heard this before, it's a battlefield quote that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And that is true now more than ever. We are all faced with a new enemy, a different landscape on our current battlefield of business, or more eloquently, like the great Mike Tyson once said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So why is planning so important? It seems self-evident that having a plan, whether it's your larger, longer-term business plan or the more tactical execution rhythm of quarterly plans, smaller projects associated with key performance indicators, but a lot of us just aren't all that good at planning or being consistent with the framework in which we use a specific model to plan for our businesses, to plan for other projects, to plan for, quite frankly, any goal or objective we have in our life, both personally and professionally. Well, we use what we call a D4 methodology. It puts the framework into its simplest form, where we define. So you're defining the objective, you're developing the actual plan and all the associated actions and accountabilities and time-bound nature of what you're trying to achieve, delivering that plan, and then, of course, debriefing the plan. One of the most important things we want to cover today is debriefing and doing it properly, what the process is, how to document key insights. We'll get into all that in a minute. So when you have a specific objective, let's say you have your 2020 goals and initiatives, your top strategic imperatives, your 3 to 4 main goals that you are, or at least were, planning to tackle in 2020. Well, usually those high-level goals need to be broken down into a series of projects. You can break those down into monthly, a quarterly execution rhythm, whatever works best for your business. So when we're thinking about a very specific project associated with a larger strategic imperative, first we need to define the high-level objective. So let's say you're the team leader. This project ultimately rolls up to you. It's best to start with your version of a high-level objective, and I'll get into what that looks like in a minute and the models you can use for defining that more clearly. And then once you have a specific project that you want to tackle, you need to assemble a committee. I prefer calling it a task force because it sounds a lot cooler. But a committee will help you create a cross-functional team of different levels of subject matter expertise, different levels of tenure, different levels of experience, both within your organization or previous experience at other organizations. So once you have this task force assembled, you have your high-level objective, it's time to schedule your planning session. Now, the thing about this methodology is we're teaching how to plan a very specific project, and obviously projects will flex in scope and complexity, but this session, this first planning session, should take no more than 2 to 3 hours, 4 max, depending on the complexity of the project. We're not talking about a meeting that leads to another meeting that leads to another planning session, and you're going on weeks and months, and then next thing you know, everything on the battlefield has changed and you have no plan. And keep in mind, like we talked about last time, the planning process we're going through is for an 80% plan. There's no such thing as a 100% plan. We'll get into all that in a minute. So I do want to acknowledge our winners here. Just take a quick moment. Got a text from one of our esteemed colleagues, Diane Crace, Senior Director of Client Services. Our winners are Eric Holt. Good job, brother. Greg McGee and Mike Brandon. So we will be sending you guys an email and getting your address for shipping free copy, signed copy of Taking Point. So thank you all. So diving into it, the first step in the planning process is to define the objective. Now, there's different ways to do this. One popular methodology is called OKR, which of course is an acronym. It stands for Objectives and Key Results. In that philosophy, your objective statement, keep in mind words, vernacular phrases are very, very important. So that's why we first define the high-level objective, but in the first step of your planning session with your task force is to make sure that everyone on that team is aligned to what that objective statement is, on what its outcome is supposed to be, the words we're using, very, very specifically. We're all aligned on, yes, this sounds right. We all understand what the words mean. We all understand what this objective is leading us to accomplish to achieve this goal. So within an OKR, your objective statement needs to be really concise, short, emotionally engaging, something that will excite the team. Now, oftentimes we recommend those objective statements being a little bit more specific. In an OKR, you have an objective statement that's short and concise. Then you have your key results, which define the supporting elements to achieve that goal. So for example, if your objective statement is to enhance your customer experience, great, it's exciting, but the key results are going to be very quantifiable. They have to, if it doesn't have a number, it's not a key result. We're going to increase a net promoter score from X to Y. We're going to increase return customers from X to Y. That gives you a very quantifiable goal. So an objective needs to be concise, quantifiable, time-bound, and aligned to support the larger strategic imperative. Some people might call them SMART goals. That's a similar thing, obviously specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. We like to keep it a little bit more short and concise, quantifiable, time-bound, and aligned to the strategic imperative. So the first 30 minutes or so of this 2 to 3 hour planning session, the task force needs to make sure they're all aligned. You can do this on a whiteboard. You can use Post-it notes. We'll get into that process in a minute. Everybody needs to come out of that first 30 minutes aligned on what that objective statement is. And in a best case scenario, you're also wanting to make sure that either the team leader and or the person above them that needs to approve the final project plan signs off on what that objective statement is. They can do that as part of that session, as part of a different session. But before you go any further, anybody that needs to be accountable to the success of this plan or the approval of that plan needs to be bought into that objective statement as well. So that's your first 30 minutes. I do want to mention that because we are now living in a virtual world, at least for the time being, it's easy to do these meetings, obviously in person, in a room, whiteboards, everything like that. But we've been very successful at doing these over Zoom as well. And I'm sure many of you on this live session have been having a lot of Zoom meetings with your team, with clients. So we use Zoom, and going through this process, we actually use Google's Jamboard, which is actually a virtual whiteboard. You can use virtual Post-it notes for collaboration. So make a note of Google's Jamboard. If you haven't checked that out, it's easy to go back and forth using that with the Zoom platform. So your first 30 minutes, you come out of that with an objective statement: clear, concise, time-bound, and aligned to the strategic imperative. Now we know what we're going after. So the next step, the second step, as you see here, right here in your sheet, is identifying blockages, threats, what's standing in our way. So really only taking 3 to 4 minutes as an individual exercise. Each person on the task force is taking their Post-it notes or making their own notes on a piece of paper, the threats and blockages they feel are going to stand in the way of achieving this very specific objective. So for example, on my very, very first combat mission, our task unit from SEAL Team 5 was going to be the first task unit deploying into Iraq to perform essentially what we call capture or kill missions, hunting down deck of cards, blacklist, other various insurgent faction leaders. And prior to even deploying in country, we were staged at Ali Aslim Air Base in Kuwait. So before we were even in Iraq, we were tasked with our first combat mission. And after we had really defined the clear objective that supported the commander's intent, we identified, okay, what are the blockages? What are the threats of standing in the way? And because we were going to be flying 3 to 4 hours from Ali Aslim Air Base in Kuwait to a dam and hydroelectric power plant in central Iraq, one of the blockages was sandstorms. So on your blockages on step 2, you need to identify those in 2 buckets. One is what's in our control, and the other is what is not in our control. So the sandstorms, of course, for us were a blockage that was out of our control, but all that intel had come back that they were frequent and unpredictable. So that was one of our number 1 blockages of even getting to the target were sandstorms. And as Murphy's Law has it, 2 nights in a row, when we've been given the green light, we're literally in the helicopters on the tarmac, blades spinning, mission was canceled. This happened 2 nights in a row. It was an emotional roller coaster. But it was a blockage that was out of our control. We had listed it in the mission plan. We fell back to our contingency, rolled the op 24 hours. The 3rd night we were go, and we executed. So after 3 to 4 minutes, we have all of our notes. Everybody shares those notes on what blockages we feel. Then we bucket those threats or blockages into controllable and uncontrollable, and into themes and buckets. You'll see some positive redundancy there, so you can all identify, okay, we're all agreed on what our threats and blockages are that stand in the way of achieving this objective. Now, 3rd step on your sheet here is resources. What resources do we need? You have several buckets here. What do we have? What do we not have that we need to acquire? Internal resources, external resources. What resources do we need to achieve this objective? That could be people. It could be budget. That might come later when you identify exactly what you're going to be doing. And those could be resources that are outside of the task force's immediate toolkit, so to speak. So that might be other people within the organization. It might be other resources outside of the organization that need to be acquired. Sometimes that requires budget. So you take another 3 to 4 minutes as an individual exercise. Everybody puts their Post-it notes up on the whiteboard or Google's Jamboard or other piece of paper. You collaborate, you get aligned on what resources we need. Are there any questions so far? Again, please feel free to ask questions. So far, this is pretty straightforward. Then you go into lessons learned. Now, here's where it gets interesting. And as we go into debriefing later, you're going to have a center of excellence or a place where you have documented lessons learned. For now, on this specific project that you're planning, you're going to identify, okay, what have we learned in the past? What has anybody within this committee, within this task force, has anybody done this before? Has anybody worked on a specific project like this, something similar? What went well? What didn't go so well? What additional threats can we think of based on your individual experiences? And you identify those in lessons learned. You don't belabor this point. You only take a few minutes to do it. You'll come back to this and adjust it after the red teaming process. And when you're thinking about contingencies, you might apply additional lessons learned. So another thing is, one thing, there was a question that I do want to address. One question was on the blockages that are in your control. Obviously, there's blockages that are out of our control, but blockages that are in your control, those could have to do possibly with negotiating specific internal budgets. Other blockages in your control are people and resources that you might need to go acquire. So there are some overlap between blockages and resources. Just like on a SWOT analysis, your strengths can be your opportunities, your weaknesses can be your threats, similar to blockages of resources. And keep in mind, this is a living, breathing document. You're going to continue to come back to this with full transparency and adjust these as you go. And some of these blockages and resources, you will probably adjust after the red teaming process that we'll get to in a minute. So now you have your lessons learned. Now you've got basically, let's say it's about a 40% plan. You know your objective, you know the threats that stand in your way, you know the resources you potentially need, you've got some lessons learned applied, you'll probably develop that list a little bit more. Now it's time to go into developing the concept of execution. You'll see that on your sheet here. This is in 3 columns, your deliverable, your accountable, and your due date. This is when the what, the who, and the when, the time-bound nature of your plan, comes into play. So the deliverable, you're going to go into this. You'll spend a little bit more time doing this. You can do this in a collaborative setting. You can whiteboard it. People can take their own notes, but it can really be more of a discussion. What comes out of this is a prioritized list of the deliverable, what needs to happen. So what is the action that needs to be taken, whether it's the acquisition of a resource, a certain step in the planning process. What is the deliverable? Who is going to be accountable? Kind of like your RACI model. It's either responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. In the accountable column, that person, whoever that is responsible for delivering that deliverable on that specific due date. So it's fully transparent. Everybody knows what they need to do. Everybody knows the action that needs to be taken and the due date. That's your time-bound nature of the plan. This is your concept of execution. You have everything hopefully prioritized. You take that time to discuss this list to make sure you are all aligned on what everybody needs to do. So you all have your marching orders after this very specific time-bound meeting. Everybody knows exactly what they need to do, how they're going to do it, and when they're going to get it done by. So everybody stays on track. And of course, with the rhythm of communication that we recommend, which is a short weekly briefing, everybody stays on track and can course correct as needed. I'm going to answer some questions real quick before we go into the red teaming process. PJ says, so we really need to train our team or teams on this process first before utilizing it, correct? Correct, that's the question. The problem becomes the mission, which then sets up the strategy and tactics. So yeah, the first step in this, and you can actually learn as you go. We do typically, when we work on this specific framework with our clients, we teach the framework first. So you're absolutely correct in that. And then we go through the process. So we make sure everybody understands the process before we just dive right in. That's a great question. So the model does need to be trained so that everybody understands their role in that first meeting, their role in what's going to happen during the rhythm of execution until the project is actually complete, delivered, and debriefed. And then you get into, of course, like you said, the strategy and tactics of all that, how that plan is going to develop over time. Next question, Michael, you said you're from Sri Lanka. You're calling in from far away. We're a bit new now to virtual offices here. Could you please share some key tips how to manage when working virtually? Yeah, we'll definitely get into that. It actually is something that a lot of organizations need to plan for. Either I know we've done some rapid planning on how to shift into managing a virtual workforce. We touched on that a little bit last time, but it's really a longer conversation. There's a lot of engagement strategies that teams can dive into. I mentioned in our last live stream now is the time to increase the level of communication with your team. More Zoom meetings, more interactivity, more projects assigned, more cross-functional teams, because our level of engagement in most organizations is traditionally just naturally low. So when workforces aren't used to working remote and working virtually, usually that level of engagement is impacted in a little bit of a negative way until we can tackle doing a better job of managing a virtual workforce, which I think will actually change the way we approach our work permanently for a while, because there are a lot of great efficiencies with the use of technology that I think will be a permanent fixture within organizations moving forward. There was one more question on lessons learned. We are going to come back to that because that is a key part of the debriefing model. So PJ, just hold one on that. We're going to come back to that. So now comes the fun part. You've got your plan. It's about 50 to 60% of the way there. Now comes the red teaming process. So what is a red team? Well, essentially what we want to do, you have your task force, you have your objective, your threats, blockages, resources, a few lessons learned that you've applied that may align with some key learnings to apply to for this plan. Now you want to have people poke holes in this plan. It's essentially, in its simplest form, you have a small team that'll come in and poke holes in the plan. You want to assemble maybe 3 people, 4 people at the most. You're going to schedule this meeting. There'll be a specific session called a red team, where you have 3 to 4 people that they have an understanding of what the plan is. They have an understanding of the objective. They're part of the organization, obviously. Sometimes outside of the organization, if it has to do with, let's say, customer experience, we recommend having a customer be part of that red team session, so you can get other outside feedback. So essentially what happens in this very short meeting, usually no more than 15 minutes when conducted correctly, you'll have a red team. They'll understand the exact purpose of this meeting, that they're going to come in and review the plan with you. So the team leader, you have your task force, you have a team leader. The team leader will brief the plan to the red team committee. Take a couple minutes, digest, ask clarifying questions. That's the first step. The red team, each person gets an opportunity, if they feel they need to ask clarifying questions. Well, can you expand on this? I want to make sure I understand this part of the objective, or why did you identify this as a resource? Just so they have a full understanding of the plan in its current state. Then comes the fun part, and it's great when you do this. We've done it virtually, we do it in person, and this is where sometimes thick skin needs to come into play. It's a great process because you have to do it in this very specific manner. So you go down the line. Each person on the red team has an opportunity to say, have you considered, using that specific vernacular, have you considered XYZ? Have you considered XYZ? Each person gets an opportunity to say, have you considered? The team leader can ask clarifying questions to make sure they understand, but the only other response the team leader can say is thank you. That's it. No rebuttals, no saying, no, of course we thought of that. It can be a little uncomfortable. It's kind of fun, but you say thank you. Either the team leader or a scribe, someone on the task force, is taking notes, making sure that they're gleaning the key insights coming from that. Obviously, there's a lot of things that the red team will think of that you've already covered, you've already thought of. They weren't part of the planning process. That's intentional. So you go down the line, have you considered? Each person has their opportunity to say, have you considered? Have you considered? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Until each person passes once or twice, then the red team session's done. You have your notes, you dismiss the red team. That's it. You can do that in a separate meeting. Oftentimes we do it during the same meeting. So we take a pause with the committee, we bring in the red team, we go through that for about 15 minutes total. It's very quick. We take our notes, and we reassemble the task force, we come back to the plan. So now you have your notes for your red team. That means that you can then go back to adjusting some of the things that you heard, possibly adjusting the deliverables and the concept of execution. You might be adjusting your blockages and resources. So you can go back and make corrections to the plan based on the feedback you got from the red team. There's almost always really, really good insight from the red teaming process. And it also creates an opportunity to gain some buy-in depending upon who is participating in that red team. And now you're almost done. Now you have about a 70% plan. We're only going to 80, so you have about 10% of the way there. The final step is there are 4 buckets within contingency planning. You have the trigger. So what's going to happen that we know we need to fall back onto a new action? So if we're planning to go kidnap some ISIS dude, we have our objectives, our threats, our resources. We have some lessons learned from a previous similar mission. We've red teamed the hell out of this thing. We've poked holes. We've rehearsed. We've dirt dived. We've rehearsed again. We've adjusted the plan. Well, okay, intel wasn't so great. We think we know how many enemy on target. Once we get on target, what's the trigger? Well, what if we get overrun? Well, the trigger is you're getting overrun and you're outnumbered. But what's the action? Well, we exfil off target. We call on air support. Whatever adjustment needs to be made, that's in your contingency portion of the plan. What is the trigger? So you know you need to fall back onto a contingency. What is the action that we need to take based on that trigger? The third column is missing data. What potential missing data will be part of this trigger in the new action? What data might we need to rapidly collect to make sure that we have the appropriate level of intel to take the right action? And then what is the expected outcome? If we have to fall back onto the contingency action based on this trigger, collect new data if needed, and then what is the expected outcome if we fall back onto plan B, plan C, et cetera. I can't remember any mission I've ever been on that didn't fall back onto plan B, C, and D within the first 5 minutes of hitting the target. So now you have basically your 80% plan. We've got objectives, blockages, resources. I see Aaron here. You're addressing some of the questions in there. Thank you. Aaron Tucker is our Director of Organizational Development, ironically also a former SEAL, smart guy, MBA, PhD in Organizational Development. So Aaron, thanks for having my back on that, buddy. So now you have your plan. So now comes the interesting part. If you've got still some time, please stick around for this. This is the rapid debriefing checklist. So what is so important about debriefing? We come across a lot of organizations that say, well, yeah, we debrief, in the military, we call this an after action review. Let's make this interactive. If you guys who are following along here, why is debriefing so important? This could be a year-end debrief. It could be a quarterly business review. It could be the debrief of a specific project, the success or failure of the rollout of a new software. We debrief when we have a big win. We debrief when we have a catastrophic loss. We debrief when the mission is a success, when it's a failure, and somewhere in between. Why is it so important? Why is debriefing so important in an organization? What does that accomplish? I'll watch as these come in. Yeah, of course, you can learn about things that you have done previously. They're similar. Debriefing creates, going back to the question about lessons learned, where do we get these lessons learned? They come from debriefing, come from the after action review process. Where a lot of teams get it wrong is that, yes, we've got a feedback loop. Thank you, Alex, Eric, to learn. Of course, it creates a constant state of course correction. Where we get debriefing wrong often is that we do a quick sort of informal meeting. We don't really come prepared, or we do it loosely, talk about, well, yeah, this went well, this didn't go so well. Maybe we can make some adjustments, but the final two steps people typically skip. We don't document the key insights and lessons learned from that debriefing meeting, and then we don't distribute that information or collect and house that data in a center of excellence or some platform that's accessible to all relevant people within the team or the organization. That's what creates a constant state of course correction. When we do after action reviews in the military, not only do we document that information, it's put in intel reports, it's housed in centers of excellence. Everybody in the organization has access to these lessons learned from the battlefield. It's impacted the way we train, the way we deploy, how we're structured, the resources we invest in almost constantly in this post 9/11 reality. For 20 years, we've been constantly course correcting based on our debriefing methodology. So we wanted to share that with you. I'll get to some additional questions here in a minute. So the first part of the rapid debriefing checklist is to schedule the debrief. We recommend scheduling this as quickly as possible. For example, let's think of this in the context of a wild success. I remember my previous company, we were a digital media and analytics company, and we had received an RFP, or request for proposal, to bid on a huge new contract for MasterCard. Would have been our biggest brand, biggest account. And so we were going up against 6 or 7 of the largest digital media organizations in the country. So we knew it was a long shot. Of course, we went all in. So we assembled a whole task force of our subject matter experts from every department, everybody who was relevant, total cross-functional team. And we kept getting bumped to the next level and bumped to the next level. We were astonished when we actually beat out 3 of the largest, most reputable digital media agencies to win the MasterCard account. So, of course, we quickly went into an after-action review, mainly to pat ourselves on the back and talk about how awesome we did. But what we really learned that was most insightful was what didn't go so well. Did we win? Sure, we won. But at what cost? That was the main thing that came out of that debrief session was, sure, we won the account, and holy hell, now we have a lot of work to do. But at what cost? We had pulled so many critical resources from very, very important projects within the organization that we actually had other client projects that were in an extreme state of suffering because we had a whole task force on this for a month, literally in offsite sessions in hotels, working day and night on this project. So we won it, but we won it at a pretty significant cost and damaging certain relationships with existing accounts. So debriefing is just as important when you win as when you fall short. So that first step is scheduling the meeting, the where, the start time, the end time. We're very strict on this as having proper meetings. Everybody comes prepared, starts on time, you end on time, and then you schedule that meeting in Outlook, Google, whatever you use. The next step is important because one of the great sort of side effects, a positive side effect of having a really good after-action review framework that's part of the culture of the organization is it creates transparency, or what we call psychological safety. It's an environment where people can come and share their insights regardless of rank, title, or tenure. In the military, we say you leave rank and emotion at the door. You come in, everybody's on the same playing field. Anybody, regardless of rank or tenure, can say whatever they feel they need to in an environment of respectful conflict. And it really starts with the leader. If I'm the most senior person in the room, or with the team leader for that task force executing that project, it starts with me. And that's what creates a level of accountability and transparency from the top down. So I would come in, the first, if you have your worksheet out, is inside criticism. What were my mistakes? I would kick the meeting off by saying, here's how I feel, regardless of the outcome. Here's how I, senior ranking officer, the team leader, project leader, here's how I feel like I could have done better. Here's where I could improve upon. So you need to come prepared with that information to share with the team. The next is outside criticism, is constructive criticism, is how do you feel I could be better as a leader? Not just on this project, but in this specific example, what could I possibly have done better? And that creates that environment right from the beginning of the meeting. Oh, well, if the senior most person in the room is being fully transparent on where they feel they could have done better, now I feel like this is an environment, a safe environment, where I can share where I feel like I could have done better. The next is the 5 key questions. And I've been in some very, very interesting after-action reviews where sometimes we're not as good at leaving rank and emotion at the door, but we'll save those stories for another time. But here are the 5 key questions. First question being, what were we trying to accomplish? What was our objective? Let's go back and take a look at the objective statement and make sure we're all still aligned on exactly what we were trying to accomplish. Next question is, where did we hit or miss our objectives and key results? Where did we fall short? It's going to be glaringly obvious to everybody in the room. And you're going to want to make sure that we're all aligned on where we fell short too. With that, I'm going to take a quick pause. There was a good question that came in about Eastern culture, where junior people may not speak up. We actually have done a lot of work in APAC and India and things like that with certain clients, where one of our objectives was to help transform the culture within the organization to greater levels of transparency up the chain of command. You do obviously run into cultural barriers when that's not something that traditionally lives within an organization. But when you want to strive for greater levels of transparency, it has to start at the top, and it has to be consistent day in and day out with every meeting, both formal and informal channels, creating that level of transparency from the top down and talking about it and encouraging it from the bottom up. Obviously, when you have cultural barriers like that, it's a longer process, but it can be done. So the third of the 5 key questions is, what caused our results? So you get into the 5 whys. So whether it was a win, whether we fell short, what caused the exact outcome that we achieved? Why? You ask why as many times as you can until you get to the point where there's no point in asking why again. You document those insights. The next step is one of my favorite parts, is as a team, you go into the stop, start, continue model. If you're not familiar with that model, I'm sure some of you are. We use this for project planning. You can use it really in any environment, but as it falls into the debrief, okay, here are our exact outcomes. Here's what we fell short. Here's what we did right. What do we need to start doing to do better next time? What do we absolutely need to stop doing to do better next time? What got in our way? Maybe some of those blockages that we identified did stand in our way. Maybe we didn't course correct fast enough. So what do we need to stop doing to make sure that we can streamline our process better to achieve the next goal better? So how are we going to do this better than last time? And then what can we continue doing? What went well on this project or this initiative, this strategic imperative that we can expand upon to make sure we keep doing that next time? And you're documenting that information. There's 3 columns in this section too. You have the specific action to be taken, the stop, start, or the continue, the who is responsible, so the accountability mechanism of the person who's going to do it, and the due date when applicable. If there is a specific action to be taken, making sure, of course, it has a time-bound nature, you have a due date. And then, of course, the last piece, as we wrap this up, this usually is a very concise meeting, is what are the lessons learned? So based on all the information we have, what can we provide future teams based on the outcome of this meeting as an after-action review from this specific project or initiative that we would want to share with the entire organization or any appropriate people within a company or a team that could learn from this. Obviously, this can be used for future projects. It can be used for onboarding new employees. It can be used for training and development, housing all these key insights and lessons learned in what we like to refer to as a center of excellence, to where you have a center of excellence structured where there's a specific category or folder where you have, here are our lessons learned. You can break those down in different types of projects so that anybody at any time can go in and glean insight and information from previous projects, apply that to future strategic planning, future initiatives, anything that is relevant. Now, the final step is to make sure that we distribute that information, house it in a center of excellence. If it's just going in the center of excellence, making sure that there's an email or some communication going out to whomever you want to know that they have access to it within 3 days of that debrief, no longer. You want to make sure that that information is collected, distilled into a concise document, and either distributed or housed in a center of excellence, but the people you want to know that they have access to it need to know within 3 days. And then we always end the debrief on a positive note. So making sure, regardless of the outcome of the project, the mission, what have you, is that you end on a positive note, making sure that everybody comes out of there feeling like they've learned something and they're going to be in a constant state of improvement. Again, this creates transparency. It's not a time necessarily for a disrespectful conflict or bitching and moaning. If people are complaining, they better come with some recommendations on how to do it better. And if you use this process, not just the planning, but the debriefing model, you are going to create an environment where a continuous improvement, or the Japanese term is kaizen, the state of continuous improvement, continually learning. It creates a learning culture within the organization. It creates rapid course correction, and really is one of the main fundamental foundations for any high performance team. So with that, I'm going to see if there's any other questions. I know, Aaron, you've been answering a few of them. But yeah, I see, Aaron, you've touched on some of these questions. That's it for today, guys. If you haven't had a chance to download the worksheets for planning and debriefing, please do so. Again, you can use this moving forward with any team, any project. It's a really great model. You can look at this recording again that we'll have on YouTube to refresh your memory on how to train them on the model prior to having an actual planning session. But otherwise, in the meantime, sign up for our newsletter. Follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You'll get access to the newsletter, to our Forbes Leadership column, some important information on the release of the new book that's coming out later this year. In the meantime, everybody, keep taking points, stay safe, stay healthy, try to keep your sanity. We'll all be on the other side of this before we know it. Thanks a lot. God bless.